Hello and welcome to Reason News. South Africa stands at a critical juncture. The prolonged stagnation of our economy, characterized by crippling unemployment, deepening inequality and systemic infrastructure failure, has placed immense pressure on the governing party, the African National Congress. Following a special National Executive Committee meeting, the ANC has unveiled its latest economic blueprint, a series of urgent interventions framed by some analysts as the party's final dice roll to avert a national crisis and reignite growth. The question is not merely what the plan promises, but whether the machinery of the state can finally deliver on it. President Cyril Ramaphosa presented the strategy, anchoring it in the three strategic priorities of the 7th administration: driving inclusive growth and job creation, reducing poverty and tackling the high cost of living, and building a capable, ethical, and developmental state. This latest plan appears to consolidate and accelerate existing structural reforms, focusing intensely on immediate bottlenecks. The first cluster of interventions targets our most severe supply-side constraints. Intervention number 1 addresses the energy crisis, proposing the fast-tracking of the Transmission Development Plan to install 14,500 kilometers of new transmission lines. Crucially, it also introduces preferential electricity tariffs for key industrial sectors like ferrochrome, manganese, and steel, aiming to leverage electricity prices to drive industrial activity. The second major intervention is aimed squarely at the crippled freight and logistics sector. This involves accelerating the implementation of Transnet's recovery plan, promoting private sector participation in both rail and port operations, and upgrading critical export corridors. This is a direct acknowledgement of the immense economic damage caused by the collapse of our logistics backbone. These initial 2 points are arguably the most critical. Energy and logistics are the very arteries of the economy. Without their effective functioning, all other growth ambitions remain purely theoretical. The plan then pivots to a focused industrial strategy. The third intervention aims to rebuild the chrome and manganese industries through measures like finalizing export tariffs, implementing defensive duties against dumped imports, and expanding the production of alloys and battery precursors. This speaks to a renewed effort toward deeper beneficiation of our mineral wealth, a long-held policy objective that has yet to see decisive execution. However, the core challenge is not the policy itself, but the delivery. The fourth intervention is perhaps the most self-reflective, a commitment to improve the state's capacity to manage major projects. This involves professionalizing the project management cadre, establishing a cross-government coordination unit, and ring-fencing catalytic infrastructure projects to shield them from bureaucratic inertia. Here's a video from SABC News.
I just have to say, South Africans must understand the context that we are in. The president talked about persistent low economic growth. From 2009 to 2024, we grew at 1.1% a year. By comparison, 155 emerging and developing countries cruised to 4.4% growth over the same period. And the emerging and developing Asia grew by 6.3%. That is a period that includes the global financial crisis of 2009 and 2008 to 2010 and the COVID pandemic. Now, why is South Africa having this consistently low GDP growth? Last year, GDP per capita was lower than it was in 2007. It will continue to decline this year. We will have had 18 years of declining average living standards. I've lost count of how many recovery plans we've had over this period. We had the national development, we had a new growth path, we had the national development plan, we had the Treasury strategy of 2019 or 2018, we had the economic recovery and reconstruction recovery plan, and all of them have failed. So what we're seeing now is just a recycling and repackaging of previous plans. And I just have to mention, unemployment and low economic growth are macroeconomic policy problems. So as long as we have a situation where National Treasury is targeting a primary budget surplus target of 2% of GDP, they are sucking out 2% of GDP out of the budget, out of the economy, and the Reserve Bank is targeting 3% inflation. That means interest rates will be higher for longer. So this is what's working against us because of these the macroeconomic policy issues. Now, if we go through this plan, infrastructure, there will be no 1 trillion rand infrastructure spend. There will be no stimulus to the economy from infrastructure spending. Infrastructure spending will decline from 4.2% of GDP this year to 3.9% of GDP at the end of this period.
The capacity gap is South Africa's Achilles heel. Announcing a 1 trillion rand infrastructure budget is one thing. Ensuring that the projects are bankable, coordinated and actually reach completion is quite another. The new focus on a professionalized project management cadre signals an admission that past efforts have been plagued by fragmented coordination and weak implementation. This intervention, more than any other, will be the litmus test for the plan's overall viability. The plan also includes mobilizing development finance institutions and pension funds for productive investment, an attempt to align public and private capital towards national growth objectives through innovative financing mechanisms. The crisis of mass unemployment demands a direct response, and the plan dedicates significant focus to labor absorption. The sixth intervention involves a massive scale-up of the presidential employment stimulus and other public employment programs, coupled with a renewed focus on reskilling for industrial sectors and expanding artisan and apprenticeship pipelines. Simultaneously, intervention number 8 looks beyond the main metropolises, aiming to enable the growth of provincial economies. This involves revitalizing industrial parks with localization targets, aligning them with special economic zones, and specifically targeting labor-absorptive sectors such as agro-processing, light manufacturing, cannabis, and textiles. This is a deliberate and sophisticated attempt to address spatial inequality, a stubborn legacy of the past. By fostering decentralized economic activity, the government hopes to create meaningful employment closer to the communities that need it most. No discussion of South Africa's economic recovery is complete without addressing the state-owned enterprises, or SOEs. The plan explicitly states that efficient and well-governed SOEs are vital to economic growth and national competitiveness, and critically adds that corruption corrodes competitiveness. The political and economic fortunes of the nation are inextricably linked to the performance of entities like Eskom and Transnet. While the plan welcomes progressive in resolving load shedding and Transnet's performance, the historical instability and malfeasance within these entities cast a long shadow over any new strategy. The success of private sector participation in logistics, for instance, hinges entirely on the end of corrupt practices and political interference. The market's trust has been fundamentally eroded. This plan contains all the right technical levers, transmission investment, private port concessions, but the execution risk remains profoundly high. Investors require policy certainty and, more importantly, a credible, sustained commitment to rooting out corruption. Until the governance structure of SOEs is entirely depoliticized and professionalized, this last dice carries significant risk of a political fumble that renders the economic strategy inert. The market's reception to such plans is often measured and cautious. The sheer scope of the interventions aimed at resetting the structure of the economy while simultaneously driving inclusive growth has led some critics to question if the agenda is simply too wide to succeed. Previous iterations of recovery strategies, such as the initial Economic Reconstruction and Recovery Plan, laid out ambitious goals such as growing the economy at 5.4%, reducing unemployment to 6%, and increasing investment to 30% of GDP. The viability of achieving these targets in the current fiscal climate, with a constrained budget deficit and rising debt levels, is a source of intense debate. The plan's commitment to aligning fiscal, monetary, trade and industrial policy is a commendable move towards coordination, yet past attempts at cross-departmental synchronicity have often failed due to internal political resistance and weak accountability. For this plan to succeed where others have faltered, the political will must translate into immediate, measurable and irreversible action on the ground. This is the moment where policy meets reality. The government of national unity must now demonstrate that the cross-party framework can transcend historical policy inertia. The ANC's latest economic action plan is comprehensive, addressing core structural impediments in energy, logistics and state capacity. It represents a bold and perhaps final acknowledgement that the status quo is unsustainable. However, the efficacy of this strategy will not be judged by its noble intentions or its technical sophistication. It will be judged solely on its execution. South Africa's economic future now rests on the ability of the state at all levels, national, provincial and local, to professionalize, coordinate and act swiftly. For an economy teetering on the edge of prolonged decline, this is less a policy pronouncement and more a race against time. We will continue to track the implementation of these critical interventions. Until next time, stay informed, updated and curious.